Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our weekly 30 minutes of Torah study class for the Torah portion of Vayishlach. We will begin with a review of the Torah portion. So Yaakov has spent 20 years at his uncle Lavan. While he is at his uncle Lavan, he marries, he has children, he becomes wealthy, and he is now ready to return to the land of Israel. He knows that his brother Esav is quite angry with him. There's going to be an encounter, so he sends gifts to appease his brother Esav. He sends all kinds of animals. He spaces them a far distance apart, so if Esav is looking off into the distance, he sees an unending line of animals going off in the distance. He prays for the safety and security of his family, and he also prepares for war. He separates his family into two groups, because he says if ultimately I have to go to battle, perhaps one group might lose and be lost, and the other one will survive. The night before this confrontation is going to take place, Yaakov finds himself alone with the angel of Esav. There's an actual battle, there's a wrestling match, it takes place all night. Yaakov has the upper hand. The angel begs to leave. Yaakov asks for a blessing. And ultimately, the angel of Esav gives Yaakov the name Yisrael, which means that Yaakov was victorious over this power of angels. Ultimately, Yaakov makes peace with his brother Esav. He continues into the land of Israel until he reaches the town of Shechem, and he actually purchases real estate and settles down in the town of Shechem. But unfortunately, his daughter Dinah is kidnapped by a person who's actually named Shechem, right? A prince of the city of Shechem, and she is in fact violated. Shechem and his father, they approach Yaakov and they say, you know what we'd like to do? We would like to marry Dinah, right? Let's marry, we'll marry into your family, you'll marry into our family. A deal is made, right? Shechem agrees that all the men of the city of Shechem, they're going to circumcise themselves. That will allow them to marry into the family of Yaakov. Shimon and Levi cannot tolerate this behavior. How could there be a society that allows one of the most prominent figures to kidnap a woman, to rape her, and then the whole society says, oh, let's make it kosher, right? Let's make it kosher. We'll get circumcised and all is good. So after they are recovering from the circumcision, Shimon and Levi wipe out the men of the city. And it's actually from this story where we learn of the concept of bar mitzvah, right? We actually figure out that Shimon and Levi, they were 13 years old at the time. They were bar mitzvah. And they took responsibility for their family, right? They acted like men in this context. Becoming bar mitzvah, that is when a person takes responsibility like a man. We actually learn it from this story. The Parsha continues and tells us that Binyamin is born to Rachel, but Rachel passes away while giving birth, and she's buried on the side of the road in Beis Lechem. After Rachel passes away, Reuven, Yaakov's oldest son, is distraught, he's frustrated, he's bothered by the fact that Yaakov kept his bed in the tent of Bilhah. But Bilhah was the handmaiden of his wife Rachel. He felt it was disrespectful. The bed should have been moved to Leah, which of course is Reuven's mother. So Reuven on his own went out and he moved the bed. Right? Yaakov was not impressed, messing with his own private life, and Reuven lost the birthright. He no longer has the privilege for the Kohen to come from his family. Yaakov then is reunited with Yitzchak, but unfortunately the Parsha concludes with Yitzchak passing away at the age of 180. The last few verses of the Torah portion discuss Esav, his family, his children, his grandchildren, the kings, the princes, and the nations which came out from Esav. So that is the Parsha in a nutshell. Now we're going to go back to the beginning of the Parsha and to discuss the topic of our class tonight. So Yaakov is planning on returning to Israel after being away for 20 years. He knows that there's going to be an encounter with Esav. He knows that 20 years ago, Esav wanted to kill him, which is why he ran away. He's unsure if the encounter with Esav is going to be positive, is going to be negative. Did he cool off? Did he change his mind? Or is he still burning with rage? So Yaakov sends messengers. The Torah actually says he sends actual angels to scout out and to see what the mood is of Esav. Esav is still furious. He's burning mad. And Esav is there together with 400 fighting men, 400 men at arms, ready to go to battle with Yaakov. Yaakov realizes his life might be in some serious danger, so he decides to do three things. Right? He prepares to meet Esav, number one, by sending him gifts. So as I mentioned earlier, he took all different types of animals, right? He had many different types of species, and he spaced them out, right, by quite a large distance, so that when Yaakov saw, it was like this mass amount of animals, like as far as the eye can see, just animals upon animals and animals. So Yaakov attempted to give him a gift to appease him. The second thing that he did was he prayed, he davened, right? He stood before God and very humbly asked for God to help him and to protect him and to save his family. The third thing that he did was he prepared for war. He knows it's a very real possibility. Esav is there with 400 armed men. He is out for blood, and he may actually have to fight for the life of his family. One way of looking at it is, you could say, Yaakov hoped for the best, but he certainly was preparing for the worst. One thing that's very clear is Yaakov was very ready to fight in a real way. He was absolutely preparing to fight, which leads us to this question. If the PowerPoint will go. There we go. Question number one. If Yaakov originally didn't want to fight and he fled instead, what changed now? 20 years ago, Yaakov had the opportunity to fight, and he would have never had to leave home. He could have stood up to his brother once and for all, and that's it. However, instead, he fled from the land of Israel. He went to Haran. He was there for 20 years. How come 20 years later, all of a sudden, Yaakov is ready? Yaakov is prepared. He will fight. What changed at this particular point in time? There are two more questions that we're going to ask about this story. Look at the way that Rashi describes it. Rashi writes that Yaakov prepared for himself three things. And I highlighted the word prepared, and I highlighted the word three things, because this is a beautiful English translation of the Hebrew, but it's not a literal translation. The word in Hebrew that's used is the word vihiskin, which does not mean prepared. It actually means Yaakov fixed himself. It doesn't mean prepared himself. The word in Hebrew for prepared is the word heichin. It seems the inappropriate word is used. Why does it say Yaakov fixed and does not say Yaakov prepared? The second question has to do with the number three. Number one, why did Yaakov choose to do three different things instead of doing one thing? And the second part of that question is, why does Rashi actually list that he did three things? Rashi could have said, Yaakov prepared himself with a gift, with war, and for prayer. Why does he actually have to say number three? We can count that there's three. What is added to the comment by Rashi saying that he actually added three things? In order to answer this question, we need to have a better understanding and appreciation of who was Yaakov. What was his character? What was his nature? What type of a person was he? Now, everyone recognizes that we all have a particular personality. We all have a character. We all have tendencies. We are naturally inclined to behave and to act in a particular way. And there's a very simple reason for it. It has to do with our spiritual makeup, our spiritual DNA. It has to do with our soul. Every person's soul has a little bit of a different character, has a little bit of a different personality, has a little bit of a different flavor. As a result of the unique spiritual makeup that we have, we naturally are going to lean in a particular direction. We're naturally going to be more attracted to or repelled from different things. The Talmud actually tells us that there were two very famous sages who argued all the time. The reason that they argued all the time is because there were different roles for different souls, right? Yes, that does rhyme. There was a sage named Hillel, and there was a sage named Shammai, right? Hillel, generally speaking, was quite lenient in his rulings. Shammai, on the other hand, was quite strict in his rulings. Again, they argued all the time. Why is it that they argued why is it they argued differently? Because they had a different spiritual makeup. Their souls had a different character and a different personality. So therefore, they saw things differently. Even though they were both looking at exactly the same facts, due to their spiritual makeup, due to their nature, they looked at things from a different angle, from a different perspective, and therefore they came to different conclusions. You could compare Hillel to Abraham. Right? In previous classes, we talked about the spiritual nature, makeup, and character of Abraham. Abraham's soul was dominated by the attribute of chesed, kindness, closeness. The way that it was reflected in Hillel, he was lenient. Because his soul came from chesed, that was the dominant element of his personality, kindness, closeness, giving. Therefore, that translated in a more lenient interpretation of Jewish law. Shammai, on the other hand, his spiritual nature was more similar to Yitzchak, right? We talked about Yitzchak's spiritual character a few weeks ago as well. Yitzchak stemmed from gvura, strength, restraint, discipline. The personality of Shammai was very much affected by his soul, which came from gvura, which led him to be much more strict. However, the Talmud does tell us, even though as a rule, every time Hillel and Shammai and their students argue, Hillel is more lenient and Shammai is more strict, there are a few exceptions to the rule. It's rare, but it does happen where Hillel is in fact strict and Shammai is the one who is lenient. Now, the question is, if logical opinions are ultimately based on the makeup of our soul, each of us has our own unique particular spiritual character trait. The reason why we logically reach a particular conclusion is because that's naturally where we are inclined to that particular direction. Why should it ever change? So number one, how could it be that Hillel and Shammai sometimes switch their opinion, even though their soul was rooted in a particular direction and they naturally were inclined to a particular direction? And the same question is for all of us. How could it be that we may change our minds sometimes, even though naturally we are inclined to lean in one particular direction? Now, the truth is the fact that Hillel and Shammai sometimes were either lenient and strict or strict and lenient, it actually adds a lot of credibility to their opinion. Because if Hillel and Shammai just followed their natural inclination every single time, how much credibility could you give to their opinion? They had a particular agenda, and they're following their particular agenda. Right? Let's give you an example of the Supreme Court. Could you imagine if a Supreme Court justice every single time ruled according to the opinion of his or her particular party? Would you trust that justice? Absolutely not. You would say this is a person who is towing the party line. There's nothing honest, there's nothing intellectual, there's nothing accurate about it. But if you have a Supreme Court justice who's able to, on occasion, every once in a while, rule contrary to what the party line is of the political party that he belongs to, it adds a lot of credibility because you recognize the person is being objective and they're only going to make a judgment based on the facts that are on the ground. So the fact that Hillel and Shammai actually switch their positions on occasion does lead them to have some more credibility. But we are still left with the question, What is it that allows them, and what is it that could allow us to switch an opinion when most of the time we're naturally inclined to go into one particular direction? The answer, of course, is that people are complex. Even though it's true, we may lean in one particular direction. There are some things that may come naturally to us, right? We have a dominant character traits within us. Yet at the end of the day, we all possess a variety of traits, right? A variety of feelings, a variety of emotions. And under different circumstances and different times, we do have the ability to call upon them. One of our more minor character traits can actually present itself quite powerfully and strongly. Here we go to a text from the Alter Rebbe, the book of Tanya. He writes, now every Jew must exhibit both of these traits, chesed and gvura, for there's nothing that has not its place. Everything has utility at some point. Therefore, we find a number of cases where Beis Shammai rules leniently and Beis Hillel rules stringently. So the Alter Rebbe says that while it's true that everyone has a dominant character trait, nevertheless, we possess all of the character traits necessary. Sensitivity and kindness, as well as the ability to be firm and strict. Every Jew must exhibit both of these traits. In other words, when there is a necessity for it, when the time demands it, even if it goes opposite and contrary to our nature, every Jew must exhibit both of these traits. We have to bring them to the surface. So number one, the Alter Rebbe is saying, even though you have one particular nature, you actually, in fact, have the capacity to go contrary to your nature. Not only do you have the capacity to go contrary to your nature, you have the responsibility and you have the obligation to go contrary to your nature when time demands it. You cannot say, it's contrary to my nature. No, it's not contrary to your nature. You have the capacity, and therefore you have the responsibility as well. Kindness is a powerful trait. Thankfully, there are some people who are born, and naturally, kindness is their dominant trait. That is the lens with which they view the world. That is the attitude that they have towards everything in life. Their first instinct, their first reaction is kindness. You're blessed if this is your natural character trait, and it's powerful. However, we have to recognize that in some cases, it's kinder to be firm. Even though you might like to react with kindness, in certain circumstances, that kindness could actually be harmful and actually be dangerous. Just to give a few examples. Every one of us would love if the teachers that our children or our grandchildren have are naturally kind, sweet, sensitive, and caring. That's what you're looking for, and that's what you want in a teacher. However, what happens if there is a fight in the classroom? You need the teacher to be able to get in there and act and be firm and act with discipline. If a child is running in the middle of the street, you need a person who's naturally kind, caring, and sensitive to be able to be strict, to be firm, and to be able to take action. A person who's naturally kind needs to be forceful on occasion as well. Another example, you have a soldier in the military. It would be wonderful if when the soldier is having lunch together with his fellow soldiers, he's sweet and kind and sensitive, caring and giving. You'd love him to be a mensch. However, when that soldier is on the battlefield, right, you need for that soldier to be able to be ruthless, or else that soldier is going to be putting not only himself in danger, but everyone around them as well. So a person might have a natural character trait and tendency, but our soul is multifaceted. Our soul possesses all of the available characters and tendencies, and we have to have the ability to go against our nature and to tap into some of our other powerful forces as well. Because the reality is, we do not have the luxury of only following our nature. Because unfortunately, what could happen are negative consequences, which is detailed in the Medrash. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish said, anyone who acts mercifully when they ought to act cruelly will eventually act cruelly when they ought to act mercifully. It's a very powerful message here, definitely worth reflecting on in some detail. This message here is actually brought very clear in the story after Abraham is asked by God to bring his son that he loves so much, Yitzchak, as a sacrifice. Abraham is willing to do it. He has the knife in his hand. He is about to slaughter his son and bring him as a sacrifice, and he's commanded to stop. He passed the test, and what God says to him is, now I know that you fear God. Now, it's a very strange thing to say at this point, because how old is Abraham at this point? He's a good 140 years old. Why would God say to him, now I know that you fear God? For over 100 years, Abraham has risked his life on numerous occasions to serve God, demonstrated his loyalty, his fealty, his commitment, his dedication. Those 100 years mean nothing. But all of a sudden, God says to him, now I know that you fear God. But based on what we just discussed, it actually makes total sense. Because in order for Abraham to attempt to sacrifice his son, he had to go completely and totally against his nature. Abraham's nature was chesed, kindness, giving, sensitivity, caring. The concept and the idea of offering your son as a sacrifice was not just foreign to him and abhorrent to him from a religious perspective, but it completely went against his nature. Up until this point in time, everything that Abraham did could have been because it was according to his nature. Every element of Abraham serving God for the past 100 years could have been Abraham acting out and behaving in a way that was perfectly congruent within his nature. When Abraham went against his nature, then God says to him, Abraham, now I know that you're the real deal. It's not just about you doing what naturally comes easy to you, what you like, what you appreciate, what you find meaningful and purposeful. It says, no, now I know that you really fear me, because you're able to go against your nature to do what it is that I asked of you. Okay, so we've discussed this idea, and perhaps you have accepted it, that you have the capacity to go against your nature and to do things that maybe you're not naturally inclined to do. However, you might argue, but at the end of the day, it's not my nature to do it, and maybe I'm not so good at it, so maybe someone else should do it, right? Perhaps I'm not the best person to do it because it's going against my nature. So here the Alter Rebbe says the attribute of goodness and kindness is hidden and concealed in people whose soul stems from the left side, who are called those who fear you like Beis Shammai. But although it is a hidden good, nevertheless, it is truly great, like the attribute of God's greatness and kindness itself, stemming from the right side. Both of them stem from a revelation that is utterly without limit or measure. What the Alter Rebbe is saying here is, it's not just that you have the capacity to act out against your nature, but it's not really you and someone else could do it better. No, not at all. Right? You have the capacity in the fullest possible measure, just like another person who it's their natural talent. Because that's the fact, not only do you have the capacity, but you have the responsibility. You have the responsibility to do so because God, in fact, has given you the full capacity to act, even if it is not according to your nature. Now we could go back to the story of Yaakov and understand what happened. Because Yaakov, as we mentioned before, he is not a fighter. The Torah tells us his personality. The Torah describes for us who Yaakov is. He is a scholarly individual. He is a man of the yeshiva. He's the man of the Torah institution. He's not a fighter. That's why he ran away. He couldn't confront Esav. That's not who he was. He ran away. What changed? What changed? Rashi tells us that it was Yaakov who changed. The word hiskin is from the word tikkun, which means fixing. It doesn't just mean preparing, but rather it also describes the method of preparation. One fixes oneself, preparing internally to do something. The same applies to Yaakov. The way he prepared a gift for war and for prayer was by fixing himself. Why does Rashi use the word fixing himself and not preparing? Because that's exactly what Yaakov needed to do. Yaakov knew he needed to go against his nature. So internally, he did work, right? He worked on himself. He fixed himself in order to be able to go against his nature. So what changed? Yaakov remained peace-loving and scholarly. That was his natural inclination. However, to meet the need of the hour, he worked to summon his inner warrior. Why does Rashi use the term fixed? And why does Rashi highlight three things? Yaakov fixed himself to summon qualities to meet life's challenges. What about these approaches demand such an intense level and internal fixing? So this is a fascinating point. A person might say, why did Yaakov do three separate things? How could you possibly do three separate things well? Focus on what you're good at. Do what you're best at. Yaakov, take one strategy, do that to the best of your ability. Why are you dividing yourself up into, number one, three separate things? And number two, it causes you to go against your nature. It causes you to fix yourself. So there's a fascinating text here. I'm going to get to it in a second. All right, we're running out of time a little bit. Listen to this. Among the Hasidic teachings spawned by observing the war in those days known as the 7 Years' War between Frederick, the king of the Prussians, and other kings, typical warfare always consisted of a center brigade with flanks on either side, against which the enemy would assemble a corresponding force. Each brigade would battle its opponent until one emerged victorious. The Prussian success, with God's aid, was achieved by concentrating all three brigades together and pitting them against just one enemy unit. In this way, they were guaranteed to conquer at least one enemy brigade. Although during the attack, enemy forces might attack, they nevertheless assumed this risk, which guaranteed victory over that one brigade. Then this would be repeated against the second and third brigade until they were eliminated entirely. This is a text from Reb Avraham the Malach. He was the son of the Maggid Mezrich, who was the second leader of the Hasidic movement, and he learned a very powerful and relevant lesson from the Prussian War. How did they go to battle? Instead of having three brigades fighting three brigades, he took all three brigades and would fight against one. Using that strategy, he was incredibly successful. The message that we learn from that is, when you experience a challenge, right? When you experience something that is difficult in life, there's one way you could do about it is follow your nature, right? Do what comes naturally to you, do what flows easily. However, the challenge is you might not be successful. Not only might you not be successful, it might actually be negative. You might have the opposite outcome. What do you have to do? You have to muster all the resources at your disposal. Just as the Prussians did three brigades against one, so too did Yaakov use every weapon in his arsenal, even the ones that were not easy, because that is what is going to give a person the greatest chance for success. So what is the message? What do we learn from this story? In life, we may face challenges. It could be with our spouses, it could be with our children, it could be with our boss, it could be with our neighbors, it could be introducing a particular mitzvah in our life. We may be inclined to say, I'm going to follow my nature. I'm easygoing, so I'm going to continue to be easygoing, right? Maybe I'm going to use my brain, maybe I'm going to use more emotional. We have strategies for battling and dealing with the stresses of life in our own unique way. What we learn from here is that real ultimate success actually lies with going out of your comfort zone. We have to objectively be able to look at a situation and then summon up the power, the resources within ourselves to ultimately battle it. Is it scary? Yes, sometimes it's scary to go out of your comfort zone, but we have to know that you have the capacity to go out of your comfort zone, which ultimately means you have the responsibility to go out of your comfort zone. And just as Yaakov was successful, you are going to be successful as well. Next week, Tuesday night, there will be no live class, and I'll explain why in just a minute. Instead, I'm going to pre-record the class. When the email is sent out on Monday night, it's going to have a link to the recording of the class, which goes to YouTube, which you could watch at any time. The shul has a YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube in the search section, just type in the Shul Center, and you'll be able to see any and all of the videos that we have online. The reason that there is no class next Tuesday night, it is because it is Yud Tes Kislev, which is the Rosh Hashanah of the Hasidic movement. It's a day which commemorates the release of the Alter Rebbe from prison, and also celebrates the time where the teachings of Hasidus were able to be spread and developed to the widest possible audience. The event is going to be Tuesday, November 23rd at 7 p.m. at the Pell Center for Jewish Life. There's an absolutely phenomenal speaker, Rabbi Cheski Edelman. He is the Rabbi Emeritus of the largest shul, I think, in the Southern Hemisphere in South Africa. Andrew Cohen knows him well. That's the shul that Andrew Cohen used to go to. Great opportunity. I really highly encourage everyone to come, and you can watch the recorded class at your convenience. And I also want to let everyone know that tomorrow night at 7:30, at this lesson, we are going to be exploring the issue of anti-Israel, anti-Zionism, and anti-Semitism, and how that all relates. So even if you're not signed up to the course, I invite you to come. It's exactly the same link as this course. Come, join us at 7:30. I'm sure you'll find it meaningful and relevant. Anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, anti-Israel stuff. It has a huge effect on the world today. It's weighing on all of our hearts, all of our minds. So I'd love if you join us at 7:30 tomorrow night. You're very welcome to join. Right. Anyone have any questions, comments, thoughts on anything that we learned and discussed tonight?
I do have a question.
All right. Yes.
And I don't know that, obviously you can't really answer this, but whatever wisdom you can give me, I would appreciate. How do you know when to challenge yourself and use the opposite side of your personality or your nature?
Right. That is a fabulous question. If a person is naturally inclined in one particular direction, right, how do you know when a person is when you should tap into maybe something which is not naturally inclined to do? And the best answer is we have to have the ability to step back and be objective. We have to look at the problem, and we have to be able to look at it in a detached fashion. We have to put aside any and all natural tendencies that we have and analyze what is the problem, what is the best solution. If that solution lines up with what you are naturally inclined to do, that's perfect and that's fabulous. And yes, our natural inclination is going to bias us probably in that direction. But when a person objectively distances themselves, stands back for a minute and tries to really look at the problem, right, and you can actually see that the real correct and appropriate solution is to go against your nature, the answer is not to abandon the whole program or to just slide into your natural inclination, but to recognize that, you know what, you actually have the capacity to do it. It may not be natural to you, but now that you identified that in this circumstance, that's the best solution, you can do it. And because of the fact that you can do it, therefore, you must do it as well.
Thank you. That was an excellent answer. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I have one challenging question, maybe. and this is regarding God, and I know we're not supposed to judge God, but if God, Abraham was going against what he was usually would do, and he was going to sacrifice his son, doesn't God know already that he's not going to do it, or that he's going to do it? He's going to actually sacrifice his son, and then God would, doesn't he knows all? So but then free will comes into this whole thing. So I'm a little confused, and like God is testing him, but doesn't God know already what he's going to do if he's all everything,
You're asking a great question, one that has boggled the minds of every religious philosopher in the past and probably in the future as well. How do we deal with free will and God knowing things in advance? So how God's mind operates, the Rambam says it's impossible for us to be able to wrap our mind around the fact that God knows what happens before and after. But what we certainly can understand is from our human perspective. Every one of us has within us potential for fabulous and great things. But if you don't actually do those fabulous and great things, then it doesn't really tell us anything about ourselves. Right. So until we actually do it and demonstrate it, it's not something that's tangible and real. Did God know in advance that Avram has such capacity to do something like this? He certainly did. But only when Avram actually did it, did he grow as a person. Did he demonstrate that potential that he had? He brought it into actuality, resulting in Avram growing tremendously as a person and an individual. I see someone wrote in the chat, why does God need to test us? Right. So this is the story of life itself. Right. If only God would make life easy, pleasant, relaxing. If we were all be able to be wealthy, healthy, and strong, and if our kids would only just give us nachas, that would be fabulous. God wanted to be in a relationship with us. Like a real relationship means that we have the ability to reject God. If we don't have the ability to reject God, then what is the value in the relationship that we have with him? So therefore, right, God created a world where there are tests, where are there obstacles, where are there challenges, where we may want and desire to reject God. We may feel there are many, many other opportunities and avenues in life that are more beneficial, more pleasurable, more attractive. Yet when we overcome those, that is the greatest testimony to the strength and the depth of the relationship that we have with God. So through those tests, right, do we establish the most real relationship, the most true relationship with God, and it also develops the hidden potential that we have and makes it into reality. And then that potential, which has become reality, is part of our toolkit. Now we can utilize that to navigate through life and actually help and better other people, because we revealed strengths within ourselves that otherwise we might never known that we had. Right. Any other questions, comments? Okay. Thank you so much for joining us again. It will be recorded. Please share it with your friends. Next week's class again is going to be on YouTube. And remember, next Monday night, steak and scotch coming up for the men. All right. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.